Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 7 of Compliance Into the Weeds, a podcast with Matt Kelly and Tom Fox. In today's episode, Matt and I revisit a topic that he had previously written on and that we had previously visited on in a podcast. And that topic is what is useful information for a chief compliance officer or a compliance practitioner on a compliance dashboard. In this episode, we really go meta because we ask not only what do you want to know about, but we focus on the types of information that describe the thing you want to know about. So we really go into the weeds on the types of information that you would want to feed into your dashboard to feel the metrics that is on your dashboard. It's a really interesting discussion, and hopefully we'll give you some interesting ideas about the types of information that you can not only ask to obtain, but use going forward. We end with a somewhat lighthearted look at a new site, which is called SEC Filings on Weed, and as you might guess, it deals with companies that have filed with the SEC for the sale, distribution, and manufacture, or growth, I suppose, of marijuana. Yes, the marijuana industry is so large now that it's being securitized. So the episode comes in at around 20 minutes. I hope you will enjoy it, and thank you very much for listening. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of Compliance Into the Weeds with my good friend and colleague, Matt Kelly. Matt, welcome back.
Hello, Tom. It's always good to host one of these programs with you. Happy to be back.
Matt, you continue to explore. I'm always amazed on our bloggers in our field. Everyone can kind of carve out their own niche, and you really continue to explore some areas that no one else has, but in a way that are incredibly useful and helpful to the compliance practitioner. And when I was really struck with a recent post from May 6th entitled "More on Useful Compliance Dashboards." And it seemed like if there was ever a podcast to go into the weeds on, maybe this one was it. So I was wondering if we might be able to visit on that subject today.
Sure, let's do it.
So you had a great number of responses from your initial post on what should be included in the Chief Compliance Officer's dashboard. But it seemed that there were a couple of themes that came out of not only the on the record responses, but I think those people who visited with you. And that was along the lines of something I've heard you talk about for quite some time, which is compliance officers want metrics that help them predict risks going forward. It's not just the data. So maybe if we could start there, and what did you hear and what were people's responses?
Yeah, it was interesting, and in fact, the reason I did this second post about dashboards is because the first one back from April really got a lot of interest and response. And what people told me in comments or emails or just in chatting with them over the phone or whatnot was, I think it was best summed up by one person who even actually said, the regulatory risks I have that I should be watching in the dashboard, like that's easy. I can tell you what I need to worry about. I don't know how to pull together the right sorts of data to tell me how much I need to worry about those specific things. And that's really what got to me, is that so many people were saying they're looking for dashboard metrics that will help them predict risks or predict how risks are changing and which ones are getting worse. And also a bit about specifically risks around employee behavior. And one person said something like, I want to be able to track employee complaints, which involve HR, which ones involve compliance, how long does it take to respond, etc. I want to track whistleblower potential before they become actual whistleblowers. And I thought that hit it very nicely, that, he's looking for predictive risks around what his employees are doing, and specifically around whistleblower complaints, which I think we can all appreciate. That's a pretty big, sensitive thing. So that's what they were telling me, that was their struggle point.
Matt, that really seems to tie into a visual that you described for me. I think back at the SCCE Compliance and Ethics Institute last October or September, where you described or visualized a string which was tangled up a little bit, and pulling that string taut so that it was really one line, and that each one of those tangles and twists and turns was a different data point. And unless you pulled that string taut, you couldn't see all of those data points in a line, and that seems to me to be consistent with what you heard after your initial post on compliance dashboards.
I think so, yeah. And the original post was more about what should be on that dashboard. What's the number or the collection of numbers you see on your computer screen? But when I got more to thinking about, okay, where do those numbers actually come from, or what are those numbers? The way I wound up phrasing it in this next post that I've just had earlier this month was, first, the compliance officer has to ask, what is it that I want to know about? And that's the thing that's on your dashboard on your computer screen. But actually, to build the dashboard, you're going to have to sit back and say, okay, if this is what I want to see, what are those points of data that describe what I want to see? And those are the individual feeds of data that somehow have to get collected, crunched together, compared, and analyzed. And I have no illusions, that's hard to do. That is a big data task that is going to be very difficult, no matter who your vendor is. And there are a lot of vendors out there who put out some very good, thoughtful analyses, and they're good at it. But if you want to be able to describe for them, this is what the dashboard should look like, you have to sit back and think, all right, well, what other points of data in my company describe what I want to see? And then that sort of, I guess, illuminates the metric on your dashboard. It's a different way of describing, what you and I were just talking about there. Yeah, it's a string of, that's tied up in different haystacks of data, and you pull it tight, and finally it all snaps together, and all those pieces of data will line up. You can see right down the line to what's really happening. It's not easy, but that's kind of where you have to try and go.
Matt, it's not that I think you have to be particularly sophisticated to understand that type of analysis, but I think in the CCO chair, you have to have some level of maturity in your compliance program to have gotten to the point where you have a dashboard that's generating the raw numbers or raw data that you can begin to dive deeply into. Does that resonate at all, or would you say that someone could come in really off the bat and start with it?
No, I think that, if you start off the bat, and you're probably going to wind up striking out pretty quick, because you need to orchestrate the company's workflows and processes to generate the right sorts of data. I'm not even necessarily talking about the formats of the data and how it gets fit into a dashboard. Yeah, that's all stuff for your vendor and developer to figure out with you. But something as simple as the guy who was talking about whistleblower complaints, and when does an employee complaint translate into, this is maybe a real whistleblower problem. He had mentioned HR data. Okay, does your HR department actually handle cases in the right way to generate data for you? And I think a lot of compliance officers listening to us will have very vivid memories or examples of difficulty with their HR department. But that's just one example of it. You need to be collecting whistleblower data that might be coming from an outside vendor. A lot of companies outsource their whistleblower program. If you're combining that data with HR data, you need to be able to be doing these things to generate the right sort of data to pull together. Otherwise, you don't even have the haystacks you and I were just talking about. You just, it's a string on a barren field. Good luck having any information when you pull on that.
Is that something that you would think a compliance officer could pull from existing data, or would they really need to sit down with HR to see what data HR has, and then see if that data can be formatted in a way which would lend itself to a compliance officer, or even more specifically a whistleblower analysis?
Well, yeah, you probably could do it just by sitting down with the HR department, like you suggested. But you're taking the long road to get there, because I'm sure, do they have this information somewhere? Yeah, it might be on scraps of paper. It might be in somebody's head. If they don't have a very sophisticated software program to collect that information, what are they going to do? They're going to open a spreadsheet. They're going to start putting it in. So now you're back to manual spreadsheets, the bane of all of compliance officers' existence. And then it gets emailed to you, and you're collating different spreadsheet data together, and there's risk of errors or outdated information and whatnot. I have no illusion that you can't wave a magic wand with any vendor and turn all of that into an automated thing in a month. It would cost a fortune. It would probably upend a lot of workflows that have come from somewhere, even if they're inefficient. They had their origins some time long ago, in that they made sense. If they don't make sense for the modern compliance program, you're going to have to modernize them in the right ways. You're going to have to sit down and think about it. But that's what compliance officers do. But, it would be a journey.
You also had another point towards the end of your article, which I guess I could call, or you wrote about as business communications. But the key takeaway I got was it was not inbound communications, it was outbound communications. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, that was a really good point that somebody made when I posted this column on LinkedIn. And, I don't know who this person was, and I'm not entirely sure that, we understand the point correctly, but he said he wants to monitor business communications. I do think if he meant communications the business is sending out to the outside world and, what risks are going on there, that's a very good point that I probably would not have thought of on my own. We are so worried about what are suppliers doing on our behalf? What are whistleblowers saying? What new regulations are coming in or whatnot? We don't necessarily think about what is my company saying to the outside world? What are we doing passing off? What if we are a third party causing problems for somebody else? I would guess that somebody else's legal department would eventually figure it out and give me a call. You need to think about your own outbound activities. Are they generating some risks? And as well as, the inbound pressures that are creating more compliance needs on the organization. It was a very good point, and I'm glad whoever it was who raised it, I'm glad he put it out there.
So really the thing that I guess the tone of your article was to get people thinking about not so much just the raw numbers, but what's behind those and what information drives some of those raw numbers. And it seemed to me that you were able to create quite a conversation around not, in addition to what does it mean, but how do we get to what I need in a way that I thought was quite creative, intentionally or not.
Yeah, the other point that really jumped out at me, and I occasionally I'll do some writing about cybersecurity issues too,
Right.
and I hear this a lot in that realm. Companies still need to understand what their normal behavior is, even if it's not perfect, even if it's not good. But a lot of what these predictive risks are, trying to get at is how things are changing. Then you need to know what your normal is right now. And certainly for cybersecurity, when they're looking at what is a normal user actually doing, that's a big struggle over there. I'm willing to bet it's a big struggle with compliance as well. What is a normal corporate organization looking like? What is my normal profile? Once you get that, and once you figure out where the data is to tell you what normal is, if you keep watching it, you'll see those outliers. But if you don't really know what normal is, because you don't have that whole enterprise-wide view of what's going on, you're going to have a challenge as a compliance officer.
And that sort of unanticipated risk, if I could use that as transition to one of the other recent blog posts I wanted to visit with you about, which is entitled Better Compliance Strategies for Email Risk. Now, I've been preaching about emails for a long time, but my preaching generally begins and ends with don't say stupid stuff in email. But you actually take that a step further because you invoke something called the Pitt Rule of Discovery. So why don't you start with us there?
Yeah, this goes back to full credit to Harvey Pitt, who was the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission in 2001 and 2002. Harvey Pitt had all sorts of observations about corporate behavior that were very good, but his rule of discovery, and I quoted it because I wrote it down once years ago, a document necessary for a company's defense shall not be found when needed, unless the document actually makes the company's situation worse, in which case said document will be discovered at the least opportune time. That is the Pitt Rule of Discovery. I suspect a lot of legal and compliance officers have felt that pain. And it jumped out at me because earlier this week I came across a report from a document management company that was looking at the number of emails companies get. According to this report, you can find it on my website, The average executive gets 88 emails a day right now, and out of the 88, probably about 5% really are business records that you should store for litigation, compliance, records retention purposes, and whatnot. But if you have even 1,000 employees, which is not a huge company in corporate America, that's millions of emails you need to classify, capture, record. It's tens of millions that are crap that you can delete and should not have around. And this report was sketching out how difficult it may or may not be for that. And this is assuming you put smart stuff in the email, not even stupid stuff, which is going to make it all the worse. But, they were saying it's a big problem even when you're saying smart and wisdom in email.
So there's one other thing I do have to talk to you about, because you had yet a third post that I wanted to visit with you on that really tied together where we are in 2016. It's entitled, "This is a Thing Now, SEC Filings on Weed."
Oh, yeah.
And I suppose it was inevitable, but with the movement towards legalization of marijuana or medical marijuana, and frankly, the profits that we are seeing generated out of the state of Colorado, it should not be surprising the SEC now has filings on us. So what did you discover?
Yeah, well, so this was great. There is a website out there now that tracks corporate filings about weed. Listeners, we are not suggesting you draft SEC filings on weed. That might explain some of the things I've read over the years, but this really is just it. I don't know who this guy is. His name on his blog is Wisebrow. I think the universe is better off and slightly more subversive without knowing who he is, so I'm not going to bother. But he tracks corporate filings about legalized marijuana business, which is a big business. He is, no surprise, apparently. He lives in Colorado. There's a big shock. It's rather tongue-in-cheek. He's got some sort of financial analysis expertise. He can do a pretty good picking apart what's going on with corporate disclosures. He calls into the earnings calls that these companies post, and he picks up on who's filing what. And then he'll also post some photos of some Mary Jane somebody's growing in his backyard or his greenhouse, and some videos of some Jon Stewart movie about growing weed as well, which I never saw. But it's funny, and it's cute, and it's just a sign of the times that you can... Compliance is a vast and diverse realm, and he's zeroed right in on the weed compliance opportunity there. It's SEC filings on weed.blogspot.com if anybody wants to go and check them out. And compliance officers who are very interested in the subject, I have no judgment, but you know who you are.
Making no judgments here. Well, Matt, that seems like a good way for us to end. This has been very interesting once again, going into the weeds. I just am always amazed at the variety of things that and angles that you find to write and talk to us about. So my only request to you would be keep it up.
Well, thank you, Tom. All right. Take care, everybody.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Compliance Into the Weeds, a podcast with Matt Kelly and Tom Fox. If you'd like any more information about some of the specifics Matt and I talked about, you can check out his website, Radical Compliance, which is at radicalcompliance.com. Hope you've enjoyed going into the weeds. I hope you will listen in the future and tell your friends about us. Thanks a lot, and I look forward to visiting with you and Matt again.